Good evening, welcome to Network X. I'm your host tonight, Mike McCormick. We're continuing our coverage on the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and its impact on you, the citizen. And tonight we are very lucky to have with us two outstanding guests. To my left is Byron Rushing, who is the state representative in Massachusetts. Good to have you.
It's good to be here.
And to his left is Dennis Brutus, former political prisoner and with the member of the South African Freedom Movement. Dennis, good to have you as well.
Thanks, Michael.
Let's start out, Byron. I'm going to start out with a question for you. You were key in bringing about some legislation in Massachusetts that focused on trade with Burma. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about that and what the state's reaction to that has been.
Yes, we in Massachusetts, we of course have a long tradition in the legislature of supporting human rights, not only in the United States but in the world. Someone actually asked me what was the first thing that we ever did around trade and human rights, and I think if you don't count the Boston Tea Party, it's probably it was around the Mexican-American War, which Massachusetts opposed. And so we have this long tradition of doing this kind of stuff in the legislature. And as you can imagine, we were in the forefront of the anti-apartheid support in the United States to internationalize the support for the end of apartheid in South Africa. We passed a divestment bill. We passed a bill around a selective purchase where we boycotted. We wouldn't buy products from companies that did business in South Africa. After the restoration of democracy in South Africa and non-racial elections in South Africa, we were looking around for making sure that we were doing everything that we should be doing in the world, when a group of students came to us who were organizing around Burma and the restoration of democracy in Burma. And they were actually just finishing up a boycott of Pepsi on the campuses in Tufts and other universities in Massachusetts. And they came to the legislature and asked us if we could do something to support that movement. And we decided that what makes a lot of sense is just to do the same kind of legislation we did around the anti-apartheid movement. And so we passed the law. It took 3 years in the whole process, but we eventually passed the law in Massachusetts saying that we would buy no products from companies that did business in Burma. This was a response to a call by the democratic movement in Burma, on the ground in Burma, led by Aung San Suu Kyi, asking for the internationalization of support for the restoration of democracy there, and asking for divestment, to end. They wanted to see if we could put pressure on companies to come out of Burma, foreign companies to come out of Burma, to destabilize the military government there. Mm-hmm. And that's how we got into passing the Burma law. And so everything was going along. We were then looking for other cities and states that would pass similar laws, just like we did around South Africa, mm-hmm. When all of a sudden we get this notice that the European Commission and the Japanese are going to bring the United States government to a WTO, a World Trade Organization panel, charging that the Massachusetts law is GATT illegal. And that's, I have to say, quite frankly, that's when I first focused on the regulations, the treaty components of the GATT treaty and the establishment of the WTO and their intrusion into local government in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so as of today,
well, what happened got even more complicated. Mm-hmm. They, of course, kept threatening to take the United States to a WTO panel. I mean, what's important here is that they never charged Massachusetts with anything. You see, they didn't talk to Massachusetts. The Europeans and the Japanese, they only talked to the United States federal government, with the assumption that that the federal government could get us to repeal our law.
Put the pressure on
right.
you.
And so while that was going on, we got a separate challenge. And that separate challenge was from a group of American companies who were concerned about being told what to do by popular grassroots movements. And so they decided, and this group is called the National Foreign Trade Council. They're a trade organization of American companies that do trade abroad. They decided to sue Massachusetts on the grounds that what we were doing was foreign policy, and it is unconstitutional for anyone in the United States to do foreign policy except the federal government. And so they sued us in federal court. And when they did that, the Europeans backed away from they put the complaint before WTO on hold, and we now have this case that has been working its way through federal court. We lost and our appeals in our circuit, mm-hmm. In the appellate court in the federal circuit that we are in, and we are in the process of appealing to the Supreme Court, because we absolutely believe that we are not doing foreign policy. What we are attempting to do is two things: to be able to make a judgment about who we are going to buy, who we are going to spend state money on, our taxpayers' money on, what kind of products we're going to buy, make a judgment about that, about not only the product and how good the product is, but how the product is made and how the company that makes that product might be supporting dictatorial systems in the world. And we think that we can make that judgment. And then finally, of course, we do believe that we are attempting to influence the policy of the United States government. And we believe that the states have been doing that since states were invented in the United States. And that is a kind of freedom of speech, a First Amendment and a 10th Amendment for states right that we have. So we believe that the corporations are absolutely incorrect. We believe that the federal court that has ruled so far is an error, and is trying to make new law. And we believe that this should be settled by the United States Supreme Court.
Beautiful. All right, Dennis, if I could ask you, you were in prison with Nelson Mandela for years. Can you, for those of our viewers that aren't familiar with your story, can you kind of bring us up to date on what happened there?
I'll try and keep it short so we get into other issues. I was arrested of all places in the Olympic Committee offices because I had opposed apartheid in sport. That was my crime, and I was sent to Robben Island for that. I escaped from prison twice, and I was recaptured twice, so clearly I wasn't good at escaping. And I was shot in the back the second time, and then sent to Robben Island. And after I came out of prison, I was exiled and left South Africa and began to campaign outside South Africa against apartheid, including Massachusetts, where I was very strongly supported, especially by students, and in Britain and Australia and New Zealand and elsewhere. We got South Africa expelled from the Olympics, and then we got onto the divestment issue, investment in South Africa, and there, again, Massachusetts was important because they passed legislation preventing business with those corporations that were doing business with the apartheid government. So there's a long history of struggle. Right now, as you know, at least we have a democratic system in South Africa. Everybody's allowed to vote. I don't think we've arrived at a democracy yet, but I think we're on the road to democracy. And I'm glad to be part of that, and I see our concern with the WTO as part of that movement towards true democracy, getting away from control by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. So the lack of progress in South Africa is partly as a result of these external pressures. The fact that South Africa has to pay service on debts, which in fact were acquired by the previous government, the apartheid government, but the new government has to pay those debts and has to treat the World Bank as what's called a preferred creditor, which means first you pay them, then you build the schools and hospitals. Social services have to wait until you've serviced the debt. So obviously we're the right part of the whole global economic struggle now.
Obviously sanctions played a big, well, certainly in the end sanctions seem to have played a big part in helping to overthrow apartheid. What was your take on that?
Oh, I agree entirely. And I think it's important to remember that when sanctions were passed in Congress, it was only as a consequence of a long campaign by students, by trade unions, by the churches. It was that kind of mass movement which eventually forced Congress into passing an act called the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Sanctions Act. And so you can see how it came out of civil society first. It was people protesting, and then that protest finding expression in legislation.
Yeah, I think Dennis is absolutely right about that, and I think that is exactly what we are trying to attempt to do again here around the restoration of democracy in Burma. Mm-hmm. I think that in order to get the Congress to take the steps that need to be taken around the support for the democratic movement in Burma, we need to show Congress that there is a grassroots movement that's concerned about Burma. And I think we did that in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a coincidence that 3 months after the Massachusetts law was passed, that a Burma bill passed Congress. The Burma bill that passed Congress said that the president, at his discretion, could decide to set, and they had a range of sanctions that he could set for around Burma. And eventually, in about a little less than a year, President Clinton did do that. I think that there are more things that the United States government should do, and I think they will do those things when they see more grassroots activity in support of Burma. And I think this is why American corporations are so upset. I think they're so upset because what they're seeing is grassroots activity around human rights in the world. And they don't want to be told that they can't make money in certain places in the world. Then it is that bald and that basic, the disagreement here. I think that they for various reasons, did not make the same moves during the anti-apartheid movement. I think that for the anti-apartheid movement in many ways was seen by American corporations as not only a movement for the restoration of democracy in South Africa, but a movement connected to the civil rights movement and the movement for black empowerment in the United States. And they did not want to be seen as being anti-civil rights in those days. Mm-hmm. They didn't want to be seen as being anti-civil rights and anti the African American community in the United States. I think now they are very concerned because here we have a movement of students in the United States, of ordinary people in the United States who say, no, we're concerned about human rights in the world, and we're concerned about human rights in a country that is far away, that many people could not tell you exactly where it is, but we understand what has happened there, and we're talking about human rights with a population that does not have a large group of immigrants in the United States, that is not a hyphenated, does not have their hyphenated base in the United States. So what that means is that there might be a turn here,
that we have a growing progressive movement in the United States concerned about human rights wherever they can have an effect on the outcome in the world.
In practical terms, I think in the South African case, the students said, why is my university putting its money into a system which is based on racism, on oppression, on jailing people in peaceful protests? And the students said, not my university. I want my university to take its money out of that country. And from that, we went to the trade unions and the churches. In the case now, places like Burma, Indonesia, the Philippines, elsewhere, I think there's a genuine concern about the fact that cheap labor is being used in that country for products which are then sold in the United States, so that people here are beneficiaries of that oppressive system. And people are saying, we don't want to be a part of it.
So in South Africa's case, the World Bank and the IMF are calling a lot of the shots there. What's the connection then between those two entities and the World Trade Organization?
Well, one interesting connection is really the lack of connection, and that is that when the anti-apartheid movement was going on in the United States, the Uruguay talks had not taken place. And so one thing that could not happen when all of this activity was going on in the United States and in other foreign countries is that there was no WTO to go to protest this issue. You couldn't go and say, we have a rule, we have set a treaty. And that's changed. And so what you see in the past several years is actually a more organized institution in support of corporations around the world, and an attempt to establish commercial rights that have no borders, and so that they can come and say to the United States, that they feel they can come to the United States and say, we don't like a law you passed. You see, and of course the Burma law was only one of several laws that foreign countries have come and protested and gotten changed because of the GATT treaty that has come into effect. And that GATT treaty came into effect in between these two movements.
To return to your earlier question, it seems to me that both the World Bank and the IMF, which have become dominant financial institutions globally, are based on a very peculiar argument that morality doesn't count. The bottom line is what counts. The market must dictate what is right and what is wrong. And of course, this globalizing process that we're seeing at the end of the century is one which transfers the resources of the poor to the rich countries. And so you see the gap growing between the poor becoming poorer and the rich becoming richer. And into that process comes the WTO as an expression of that ideology, and more than an expression, an actual instrument for the execution of that policy. And so we see the WTO coming in, as Byron has said, and making decisions, whether it's on bananas in the Caribbean, whether about the environment in Mexico, or pollution in Canada, and making decisions which benefit the corporations and actually are harmful to the people. So this whole ideology where profit is the dominant interest, the determinant, I think the WTO is the highest expression of that process.
And I think that one of the reasons why we're here this weekend in Seattle is that, of course, the WTO is going to have a ministerial meeting here. I mean, all the big guys from the WTO from all the countries are all going to come here into the United States for the first time. And that gives us an opportunity really to educate people and Americans about this whole process, about the World Bank, about IMF, and about the GATT treaty and about the WTO. But one of the things I think that, and Dennis has experienced this a lot more than I have,
But one of the things that I'm always amazed at when I go outside of the country is how well-informed average people are about all of these issues. They know what the WTO is. They know what the WTO is doing. They know what the IMF is. I've been in Haiti at a meeting of organized peasants, and they'll ask me questions about American policy related to these institutions, and it's just quite amazing. And I think that one of the things we really need to do is to bring Americans up to speed educationally about this. Now, it is difficult because these systems are innately, by design, secret. I mean, we do not know, they do not publish the information that goes into these panels. In these dispute panels, what actually is said to each other in these dispute panels, the charges that are brought are not public. There's no congressional register, or there's no reporter of these panels, but that's generally true for most of the negotiations that go on. And one of the things that we have to speak to is both the education, but also from that education to start being able to say, well, how do we get to know more about what's going on that's affecting our lives by these institutions, what the people in this business call transparency.
I think educating the people is important, but I would like to be a little more ambitious than that. I think we need to educate the WTO. When they come to Seattle to say, we've seen through you, you're out the business of enriching the rich and impoverishing the poor, and your whole logic is based on the corporate morality, and we want it to stop. I think we want to make a very clear statement in Seattle through the churches, the trade unions, students, community organizations, that there will be no ministerial round beyond this point. That we are saying here in Seattle we want to stop to this process of the distribution of wealth, so that there's an elite privileged few on the one hand and the rest of the people in America, in South America, in Africa, in the Caribbean, all over, are suffering as a result of these policies. So I hope Byron doesn't mind my saying that I want to be just a little more ambitious.
I agree with that completely, because I think that in order to make any judgments about the WTO, we don't want the WTO to change anymore. You see, so one of the things that we don't want to have happen, and we really, I do believe, have the opportunity to do this in this meeting when it comes to Seattle, is to say to the WTO, no, stop, no additions, no changes to anything you're doing. We want you to just tell us what you have done. Show us what you have done since you have been established, and show us how average people in the world have benefited or not benefited from what you have done. And don't make any change. We don't, because here's the secret organization that is proposing that there be other things, that other aspects of treaties that should be adopted. And we say, no, let's find out the secrets first before you start making any changes and proposing any other intrusions into the sovereignty of countries and states in this world.
Secrets, but more than secrets, facts that are already available. The World Bank itself says the number of people living in starvation at present has grown from 1.2 billion to 1.5 billion. 300 million more people living in starvation under this system, which is supposed to make life better for everybody. Instead, the situation has steadily become worse. And we can show, and that's why we want study, we can show that the IMF and the World Bank and the WTO have in fact contributed to that increased poverty. That's why we want them to stop, and we want to examine what has been done up to now. Let me just take up one other point very quickly. And again, I am going to take something that Byron said a step further. Because it seems to me when we talk about civil rights and the denial of government, state or local, to make decisions. It's not so much that we're making new law, it's that some external body has the nerve to come in and tell you what law you can make and what law you cannot make, and in the process deny us absolutely basic human rights, such as the right of choice, the right of saying, I think what you're doing is wrong, I refuse to support it, and if your government is corrupt, I will not do business with that government. Those are basic human rights. And the WTO is trying to tell people that they no longer have that right because it made a secret deal somewhere which deprives us of that right.
All right. We are only have a minute or two left. I understand you're both going to be speaking this Saturday?
Saturday, right, at the Labor Temple.
The Labor Temple.
Right.
Saturday
You have to tell us where that is.
All right. That's at 2800 First Avenue, and it's at 9:30 in the morning. As well as I believe you're going to be on radio tomorrow. Let's just run through this. Radio on KUOW, 94.9, I believe, at 10:30. KCMU radio, 7:30 a.m. on Saturday. And then, of course, the Labor Temple on Saturday.
And so we hope to see as many people who have to come out as possible, and they'll get a chance to ask us questions. They'll be able to get your job, and and hopefully we will be able to hear more about the strategies that people are working on right now locally here in Seattle, and work together on developing some more strategies so that we can stop the WTO.
All right. Well, thank you both for being on the show.
Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to add just that, fortunately, students across the country are organizing a national conference on the WTO in October at Yale University. And then in November, when the WTO is meeting in Seattle, they're calling for a national day of action across the country. So there's great things happening.
Great things, and people need to get involved with that.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you both for being on.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you for tuning in, and we will see you again next week.
America is essentially
why